Session number 5, page 93. The goal of this session. The purpose of this presentation is to teach the engaged couple a framework for making responsible moral decisions in their marriage. Learning to make important decisions in a manner which reflects openness to God's will and deepens the unity of the couple is the desired outcome of this process. The engaged couple should be challenged to recognize the moral implications of many decisions they will make during their marriage, and in particular, they should be challenged to revisit their decision on family planning in light of the decision-making guidelines presented. So, as we just shared, when we process the homeworks on sexuality, we're asking them some of the questions on each one, but that one particular one, number 16 on that, let's talk about sex. If it's probing their past relationships or something, their past actions, that is not for, we don't want to know all the details. We just tell them, respect your privacy, but you need to talk about it with each other. So we would do that, and then we'd ask them, did you listen to the other 2 sections of the CD? And have you had a chance to think about the presentation and how has it impacted, your thoughts over the past few days? And then we go into the process.
Yeah.
Which on page 94.
Yeah. So in preparation for this process, on tonight's program or this section, they would have done the sexuality homeworks and they would have listened to those other 2 20-minute segments. And we're going to, again, as you do the homework, you're not going to cover the CDs. You're going to work those into your discussion of those topics when you get into it. So the focus of tonight, I always say that what we really want to focus on tonight is the whole idea of decision making. Next to conflict resolution problems, a lot of couples who have hiccups in their marriage, it seems to be over decision making, poor decision making skills. They either tend to make decisions in not a unified manner or a very unilateral way. One person makes a decision, the other person has to deal with the consequences. So what we want to suggest to you guys is a framework for making good, sound decisions. And before we do that, we would like to ask you to share with us a decision that you wrestled with recently. Other than the decision to get married, maybe you didn't wrestle with that, but what was the decision that you grappled with and maybe went back and forth on, whether it was, buy a house or move to a different city, or, does anything come to mind? So we asked them to think about it. Now often, this is very good because I'll let you know what's going on in the dynamic. To some degree, we're kind of setting a trap for them. Because what I'm trying to get them to do is to share how thorough they were on making a decision like buying a house, for example, compared to how unthorough they've been in dealing with some of the moral issues that they have to confront. And so, the final outcome or the final punch is going to be, you need to be at least as thorough in considering this teaching on family planning as you were in buying that house, Not a guilt trip, but just to say, you're a responsible adult. Yes, we make decisions out of conscience, but we have a responsibility to educate our conscience and to have an informed conscience before we make a decision. So that's really what I'm hoping to get. So I'm looking for an example of something that took that wasn't an obvious decision, that took a little bit of give and take, that took a little bit of homework, took a little bit of analysis, and we find a lot. Probably more than half of the couples we deal with, seems like everybody wants to own a house when they get married now. So they're talking about buying a house or taking a job or something like that. And so I begin to say, okay, so tell me about how you approach that decision. And I try to get them to talk about how much effort they put into it, how many houses you looked at, how long this took, and they went back and forth, and they checked internet on this, and they checked their property taxes, and they really did a thorough job. And I said, okay, and then when you made that decision, were y'all both on the same page? Did you wait? Did you ever have a situation where one of you really wanted to buy one house and the other hesitated? Oh yeah, and we waited till we were together. I said, well, great. So we can use that as an example as we talk through the process. So sort of file that away, and then we say, okay, so we're going to outline a process for you. And it's a very simple 3-step process, and we're going to give you a handout that's going to summarize how to do it. But this is a process that's ideally suited for making what we call responsible moral decisions. And when we say a responsible decision, we mean a decision that considers the impact not only on you as a person, but on the other members of your family. So I use the example of me being offered a very attractive job transfer with my firm to another city that would have been a very nice promotion, a big increase in pay and so forth. But at the time it was offered, it just wasn't a good time for our family. It wasn't a good time for things Jan was involved in with our kids, and we turned it down. I said it would have been irresponsible for me to make that choice, even though it looked good on paper for me, and look good in terms of our financial well-being, for me to make that choice without considering the impact on Jan and the kids would have been irresponsible. A moral decision is a decision that has some element of what would God want me to do in this situation? What would please God? Because ultimately that's our task. And so some of the issues that have moral implications we have listed here on the top of this page, page 95. The care of elderly parents when they can no longer live alone. An issue Jan and I face, now with her dad. Decision to undertake significant debt in order to enjoy a more comfortable home or luxury automobile. Level of financial contribution to charitable causes. Support of the church. Decision to accept job-related transfer that would require the whole family to change work and school environments. One's response to the incidences of racism in one's neighborhood or workplace. So it goes beyond just family planning, although family planning is one of the ones that we're going to talk about later on that evening and that they heard about on the CD. So we want to broaden their focus that we're not just talking about contraception, we're not just talking about family planning, we're talking about a whole host of issues about how we use our time, spend our money, how we reflect our values in the way we live. And so there's a 3-step process that we use, and the way we typically do it is I kind of give a quick run through of how the process works, the 3 steps in the process, and then Jan will jump in and give like 2 examples of how we applied the process in our own marriage. So first step in the process is prayer. And that, again, we're trying to make an important decision. This is a process that can work for any major decision, whether you're going to take that new job or buy that new house, but something big where you want to be careful and you want to be open. So prayer is the first step. And that prayer, it's not just saying our Father and flip a coin. It's bathing the process in prayer. It's asking the Lord what we're really asking for. These are difficult decisions. And so we're really asking for openness and clarity in the way we see things. So our prayer is something like this: Lord, please enlighten us, open our eyes, send us the resources and insights that we need to see this the way you want us to see it. To the extent that we, talk about this with other folks, send truth speakers into our lives to help us see this with great clarity. We pray this. And this prayer isn't just something you do at the start of the process, but you continually sort of bathe the process in prayer that you'll see this clearly. The second step in the process is discernment. And discernment is the fact-gathering process. It's, and this is when I'll go back to whatever their example was. So I said, when you were looking for that house, look at how much work you did. I mean, you check the neighborhood schools, you check the level of property taxes, insurance rates. You were very thorough, weren't you? You wanted to make sure you didn't make a mistake. So you looked at things on both sides of the coin. You tried to balance this. You tried to understand this. Similarly, if we're dealing with a moral issue, we ought to try to figure out or find out what has the church taught on this, if anything. So reach out to a priest, a deacon, or a person of faith. Look at a starting resource like maybe the Catholic Catechism and see, what does the church teach? And try to understand why it teaches the way it does. And as you go through this discernment process, you begin to gather your facts. Hopefully you're continuing to pray for clarity. You may wind up with a little, the little chart of the pros and cons of this choice of action, the benefits going one way or another. And you're doing this all the while talking with one another. You're talking about it, you're praying about it. And then finally, the third step in the process is mutual agreement. You don't pull a trigger on a decision until you both wind up on the same page. And that is so critical, because why is that necessary? Remember, we said all along how our goal is a sense of unity. When you make a decision and leave the other in the dust, you're creating great disunity, because you give that other person the right to point the finger at you and say, I told you you shouldn't have done this. This was your crazy idea. I never agreed to this, you know. So inevitably, one of you is going to get there first. You wait until you both make it to the same decision before you pull the trigger on the decision.
So I'll tell you a couple of decisions we made. Early on in our lives, after we had the first two children, Lloyd was offered a transfer to New York, which we did take, and he started working in downtown Manhattan. We lived in New Jersey. And we liked our life there. They asked Lloyd to stay a third year. His term was 2 years, and they asked him to stay a third year, but he had had enough of the snow at that point, and so, so they sent us to Charlotte, North Carolina. We're both natives from New Orleans. So we go to Charlotte. Now, we got to Charlotte. I was pregnant for our third child. I loved our life in Charlotte. Charlotte's a beautiful city, 4 distinct seasons. We had a great house, a great church parish. We had great friends. As far as I was concerned, I was happy as could be. But Lloyd was not happy in the office that he was working in, and he's pretty easy to get along with, but the partner in charge of this office was affectionately known as the Ayatollah. He was really difficult to be with. So anyway, lo and behold, a year after we're in Charlotte, Lloyd gets a phone call from a CPA in New Orleans offering him a job in New Orleans with another firm and asking if he would consider, coming to New Orleans to talk about it. So that began for us the process, because I was obviously very happy with our life in Charlotte. He was not with his job, and so we started. And so we started the prayer, constantly praying every day. He started the fact gathering and talking to his present firm and the other firm, talking to friends, trying to really get some discernment going. And after about 2 months of this back and forth and collecting data and trying to grapple with it and praying, Lloyd came to me one day, Sunday, and he said, honey, I've got to give them an answer. Where are you in the decision making? And I said, really, Lloyd, to tell you the truth, where I am right now, I'm pretty much indifferent. I could stay here because I love our life in Charlotte. But my parents are my mom was still alive, my parents are the only grandparents our children will ever know. We've got 3 kids. So to go back to New Orleans would be a fine thing too, because at least they'd be by their grandparents. So I said, why don't you go upstairs and pray by yourself for a little while, and whatever decision you come to, I'm on the same page with you. So that's one way of coming to mutual agreement, is for one person to not have either way, to be completely at balance and say, I'll go with either decision and it'll be mutual. Another way is for both of you to come to the same decision, so I fast forward after Katrina, I'll give you this example. Life in New Orleans after Katrina wasn't easy, and Lloyd's office had been impacted and so forth. Anyway, so we started talking about moving, and at this point to move out of New Orleans. And I have, for the past 14 years, done a good bit of work with a priest in Nashville. I go up there several times a year and direct retreats and give retreats. And so I said, well, let's go looking in Nashville. We don't have any 2 children in our out of the 5 that live in the same city. So I said, let's go. At that time we had a child that lived in Charleston, one that lived in Atlanta. So I said we could go up to Nashville and be sort of in the same general vicinity. Anyway, so we went to Nashville, got a realtor, looked around, found a place I thought we could really find a place that I'd love to live, a house in that section I'd love to live. I mean, I'm like ready. And Lloyd says, well, I think we need to go home and do the process. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the process. And so we go home and we started specifically praying daily that the Lord would reveal to us His will about whether or not we should move. And about 12, 14 days into our praying, very specifically, the Lord really changed my heart altogether and made it clear to me that He wasn't calling us to move. And Lloyd was really moved to say, I don't think the Lord's wanting us to move because your dad's, by this point my mom had, was deceased, and My dad was, in another relationship. I mean, he was married, but she was not in good health, and so we could see the handwriting on the wall. And so, and I have a brother who got colon cancer right before Katrina, younger than me, a brother, and we were taking care of him. Anyway, it just seemed like, you know what, I think we're supposed to just stay put. And he said, until your dad dies, I just don't think we have the freedom to leave him. And so we were both at peace about that, whereas before I was ready to forge ahead and make this decision. We both pulled back, really got into the process, and both came for different reasons to the same conclusion that God indeed was not calling us. And then my dad's wife died and my brother died, and it's a good thing we didn't move because we really are responsible for my father. I have a brother that lives in Metairie, but really Lloyd does all his finances and everything. So those
doctors.
Those are two examples of how we use the process to come to mutual agreement and really made some life-giving decisions that added to our unity.
Yeah. And as you know, when we've been on some married couple retreats, sometimes couples will come talk to us for a little bit of counsel, and some of the stories we've heard about poor decision making, scary. But one couple particularly, I remember they came to see us, and they had like 3 or 4 kids fairly quickly, and the guy said, I can't afford to raise all these kids. I'm going to go get a vasectomy. And the girl says, we can't do that. We're Catholics. That's against our faith. We don't believe that. That's mutilation. We don't do that. He said, well, call it what you want, but I can't do this. I can't do this. And they talked about it and disagreed about it. And he went off and had a vasectomy against his wife's will. So this is like 8 years later. This is still the elephant in the room. Obviously, she's still so resentful of the fact, one, that he did it, and two, that he did it against her explicit, wishes. Conversely, we know of another couple where it was a flip story where a woman insisted on having her tubes tied against her husband's desires. So we've had situations of someone a guy who put in an offer and bought a house that his wife had never seen. He said, I just knew you'd love this house. I'm afraid it was going to be gone if I didn't put the offer in, So I'm sure every time something's wrong with that house, he hears about it, So when you don't make decisions in a unified manner, you really set yourself up for a lot of discontent, a lot of disunity. So that's the beauty of the plan. It works great. It works for all major decisions: prayer, discernment, and mutual agreement. So we would now turn our attention to the issue of family planning. Now, they've listened to the CD. You have an outline of the CD, the key points of the CD starting on page 99 and 100. But let me just clarify what we're trying to do here. So I remember your former pastor, Father McLaughlin. We heard him at a presentation once, and I thought he was so wonderful, so clear. But he said, in sacramental preparation, we're trying to address 3 issues: ignorance, doubt, and error. Ignorance, doubt, and error. And Lord knows, in the area of family planning, there's an abundance of all 3 in the understanding of your typical Catholic. So what we're trying to do here is, again, sort of like the first night when we talk about are they sexually active, we're not going to lock the door and make them sign the pledge. Our goal is for them to, in the light of this decision process, to realize, we probably need to go back and revisit this decision and at least do the process. Make sure that we've done a thorough process of trying to understand where the church is, because we don't understand where the church is. Try to understand that and discern what's the right thing for us to do. That's all we want. We want them to go back and revisit the decision. We're not going to lock the door on them. But we use this as a time to try to clarify for them the church's teaching on contraception and natural family planning. So you have a little bit of the key points there. You also have a handout in the back that you will give them on excerpts from Humani Vitae, which is the church's teaching on contraception. So just to give you a feel for that, I'm going to sort of present to you the way I would normally present this teaching on contraception. Because, you know, how many of you ever heard this in church before? Have you ever heard a teaching on NFP or on contraception? No. You don't hear it, you know? Sadly, because I guess they're worried about, you know, the mixed age groups, and you don't want to talk about sex in church or whatever. But sadly, most of our couples, most of our Catholics don't know the teaching. So, contraception is not an invention of the 20th century. There are evidences of contraception, goes back into pre-Christian times. Back in ancient Egypt, there's evidence of contraception. What they used to use then was like the intestines of an animal. They would use it as sort of a surrogate condom, or they would use some form of a douching approach. You know, we did not know, and those of you who are medical professionals here can attest to this, but I don't think we knew about the female ovum until the mid-1800s. And so all the way up to that time, the thought was it was the man's seed that created life. And so if you could keep that, and as long as the seed went into fertile ground, a fertile woman, you'd have a child. That's why the kings were always, you know, killing the queens who couldn't bear children. They didn't realize that maybe the problem was theirs, you know. So the idea was to either keep the seed from getting in the woman or wash it out of her right away, and that would prevent pregnancy from happening. This was going on hundreds of years before Christ. And that practice, the practice of contraception, was uniformly condemned by every faith tradition. Christian, Jewish, Muslim, uniformly all condemned as an abomination. This is not, you know, what God intended for this gift of life. And that was consistent all the way up to 1930. Now, what happened in 1930? 1930, the Anglican Church said that they could understand that for grave and serious reasons, a couple could practice some form of contraception, but never for selfish purposes, but only for grave and serious reasons. Now, what changed in 1930? What changed in 2,000 years that all of a sudden warranted a change? Much like today, you can't pick up the newspaper or turn on the TV without hearing some story about climate change. In the early 1900s, they were paranoid about overpopulation. They were really fearful that the growth of the population was going to outstrip the food supply. And so there was a lot of concern about we need to slow down population growth. And I think this got some people thinking that there needs to be some way to slow down reproduction, needs to be some way to control life. And so that I think was the reason why this was getting so much attention. So the Anglican Church in 1930 comes out with this. And again, they were very clear that this should never be for selfish reasons, only for grave and serious reasons. And all it took was for the window to open a little crack, and before you know it, over the next 30 years or so, it wasn't that the other churches got on board with it and endorsed it, it's that they stopped teaching it. They just backed away and almost said, well, we're just going to leave this as a matter of conscience for each couple to deal with. And they don't teach it. They don't teach yay or nay. They don't teach it's good, they don't teach it's bad. It's up for you to decide. So they took the politically safe way out once that door opened. And the only churches to this day who continue to adhere to the traditional teaching are the Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church. Now, so that happened in 1930. 1960, the pill came out. And the pill took off like wildfire. Although the early versions of the pill were really deadly for women. Deadly for women. Particularly, they launched them initially in Latin America, and there were thousands of women who were killed from the misdosage that was in the pill initially. So when the pill comes out, and everybody initially thought this was this was a godsend, they pressed on the Catholic Church and said, okay, we have overpopulation issues to deal with. Of course, overpopulation got a lot less serious after World War II took 60 million people off the face of the earth. But still, still had some concerns there. There was a lot of poverty in third world countries. And so the church was asked if they would take a position vis-a-vis the pill and whether the pill would be acceptable. And so Pope Paul VI appointed a study commission that met for about 3 years, and then at the end of that, he articulated the position of the church in an encyclical called Humani Vitae, of human life, written in 1968. And one of the principles of Vatican II, and a long-standing principle of the church that he tried to articulate in Humani Vitae, is that there is an overarching principle that all married couples have to follow, called responsible parenthood. Responsible parenthood means that the church isn't asking you to have as many children as are humanly possible. No. The church recognizes that for legitimate reasons, there may be a time when having another child might not really be good for you or your family right now. Maybe it's health issues, maybe you've had a number of children in a short period of time, maybe it's financial issues. But for serious reasons, and it's up to you prayerfully to discern, now would not be a good time for us to have a child. If that's the situation you find yourself in for good reasons, not selfish reasons, then some form of family planning or family spacing is appropriate. And how should you apply that? What should you do when you find yourself in that situation? That is the vein in which Humani Vitae is written. How do you apply this principle of responsible parenthood? If you notice, Pope Francis talks about responsible parenthood a lot. He very much embraces this. So what does he say? He goes back to the principle that as we look at our faith and we look at the traditional teaching of our church, we see that the gift of marital intimacy has two great benefits and virtues to it. They kind of use it in theology terms. They call it the two goods of marital intimacy. The first is what we call the unitive aspect. It bonds a couple together. So we say, we even know now hormonally that there are some hormones given off to increase that sense of bond. It's that sense of unity and oneness. The unitive aspect of marital intimacy is good. It's one of the benefits of marital intimacy. The other is the procreative aspect. And again, notice I don't say reproduction, I say procreative. It's cooperating with God in the creation of a new human person. What an awesome gift. And we have both of these are given to us by God, and they are joined at the hip. They are not meant to be separated. They're not meant to be put in a pecking order. We view them as kind of co-benefits of the marital intimacy, not meant to be separated. And what he said was that if we try to separate these, we're going to have a situation where, if we try to separate them and just emphasize the unitive aspect, we're going to have a situation where women become objectified. You're going to have a huge rise in the number of out-of-wedlock births. You're going to have a huge increase in single-parent families, abortions, homosexuality, pornography. A whole host of horrible societal problems are going to happen if you separate these two. And boy, was he right. Was he right. I saw a study the other day that was really pretty shocking. In 1965, just a year or two before he wrote this encyclical, the number of kids born out of wedlock in the United States was 6%. I think last year, for the first year, it tipped 50%. In the African American community, it's 72% of kids are born out of wedlock. All of that's happened really since the mid-60s. So he was dead on. He was absolutely right. And just to get an idea of what that looks like, that idea of separating these two, I use the analogy sometimes. I say if you went to, and I'll point to the groom, I said, if you went to your priest and you say to him, Father, I've got to be honest with you. I don't love bride here. I don't love her. But I have always wanted to be a dad. And look how beautiful she is. Don't you think she's going to give me some beautiful kids? That's the only reason I want to get married. I just want to be a dad. I just want to have kids with her. The priest would throw you out the office. He'd think you're a nut job, But that's sort of the mirror image of what happens so often when a couple says, oh, kids. Oh, man, kids cost a lot of money. I don't want kids. I just want to have the unitive stuff. I want to have the fun stuff. I want to be able to travel. I want to live the good life, So what the Pope said, these two were never meant to be separated. And when you separate them, it's not going to be good. You're going to have a real problem. So he says that where a couple finds themselves for legitimate reasons in a situation where they have to exercise responsible parenthood, and they say, now really would not be a good time for us to be open to another child, we should use a form of family planning that meets two criteria. One is that it doesn't violate the dignity of the human person. Now, what would violate the dignity of the human person? Obviously, some form of sterilization would violate the dignity of the human person. So one, it doesn't violate the dignity of the human person, and two, it doesn't violate the integrity of the marital act, meaning it doesn't try to separate these two goods of unity and procreative. So when you look at those criteria, the only method that really makes sense and that fits the bill is natural family planning. Because in natural family planning, you're using the scientific approach to, you're not trying to interfere with, you're not trying to undo anything that happens in terms of marital intimacy, but you're trying to understand the natural flow of a woman's cycle, to understand when a woman is least likely to be pregnant. Now, natural family planning done for selfish reasons is not approved by the church. It's not contraception with holy water on it. The basis has to be that, we have legitimate reasons right now to really not be open. It would not be good for us right now to have another child. And you make that decision prayerfully, not selfishly. And so, does that help kind of understand the whole framework here? It's very consistent with the theology of the body teaching, because it's all about, like Jan said earlier, what we're asked to do in marital intimacy with theology of the body is that we're making a complete gift of ourselves to one another. And when we're contracepting, we're not. We're holding something back. I'm giving you part of myself, but I'm not giving you all of myself. Oh no, I'm not going to give you all of myself. I don't want that. It interferes with the totality and the freedom of the gift to one another. So again, it ties in very well with the theology of the body.
How much time do you spend on it? Because as they're just beginning to get married, that just seems like, how much you've been talking about. The other part is really probably more appropriate for a marriage kind of weekend than a big people who aren't even married yet. Because that's kind
on contraception, you mean?
Yeah, you're talking about, these are people who, if in a pure sense are virgins, you're talking about natural flame planning, they're like, what are you talking about?
Well, again, 80% of them are probably sexually active.
Right.
And if they're sexually active, it means they're all contracepting.
Yes.
They're not taking their chances, they're contracepting. I don't know what they're doing, but they don't need to tell me what they're doing, but they're contracepting. Now, the other thing that you hear, I can't tell you how often it happens now, the girl will say, well, I'm not sure what we're going to be doing. I've been on birth control pills since I'm 13 because I had difficult periods. Not that they've ever gone back to the doctor and said, do you think this is good for me to be on birth control pill? It's almost like, okay, well, this is my protection. I don't need to worry about it. So they are, nearly all of the couples that we talk to probably would prefer to wait maybe 2 years before having a kid. So they're looking at contraception. So we need to challenge their thinking a little bit, just to say that if and we're not saying that from a perspective of family planning that you should never go into marriage thinking that you shouldn't have kids in the first 2 years. We're not saying that. Again, for legitimate reasons, somebody might be in med school or whatever. We can understand that. But we want to make sure they understand the framework of the church's teaching. And this is an area that they really don't understand. They haven't really been taught. And so our goal, again, is not to convince them. Our goal is to help them understand the teaching and to go back and say, now be as thorough in considering this as you were in buying that house. So that's the goal. And that's about as much time as we give it, exactly what we just
We're
gave.
gonna talk about NFP as the last part of this session with them. We're gonna give a witness to our own practice of NFP. We're gonna talk to them about what, and especially if they're virgins, if they don't know anything about it, we're gonna talk to them about the process of NFP, and then we give them the phone numbers of the NFP coordinators of our diocese so they can take the classes. We recommend the classes and that kind of thing. But we started about a year or two ago doing this little segment because of the lack of teaching or understanding of the whole contraceptive issue. And even though these couples, even the virgin ones, they don't understand what's wrong with contraception because nobody's told them, you know. So both with theology of the body and this little segment that Lloyd just spoke on contraception, what we're trying to do is make sense to them. We're trying to appeal to their reason, that the teachings of the Catholic Church are not unreasonable teachings. They just aren't, you know, celibate men in Rome who have written things that they don't want married couples to have fun, you know. And that's what a lot of people think. But the teachings of the Church on moral issues are very consistent. They fit together, and they are for the upbuilding of the human person. And we have grown in our understanding of our call from, that when we feel our call from the Lord in terms of this marriage preparation is to raise people's awareness of the consistent teaching of the Church and to try to offset in some way the lies that they're constantly swirling around in. I heard a priest say the other day, if you really want to understand theology of the body and you want to start living according to that teaching, then turn off your TV, because you can't watch what the world's feeding you and read TOB and understand it and practice it, because it's totally at odds with it. So that's why we have beefed up our presentations on TOB and on contraception, because we want them to understand the consistent, rational teaching behind, you know, of the Church.
Which they've never heard, because again, it's never taught it from the pulpit, you know. It should be, but it's, you know, it's never taught from the pulpit. So our goal is, if you're going to give them that handout of the Humani Vitae, a lot of the stuff I just talked about is going to be in a handout that you give them. But it's that, get back to that issue that Father McLaughlin, you said, ignorance, doubt, and error. And we're trying to clarify that by giving them a little bit of clear teaching so that they understand, you know, exactly what the teaching is. It may be different from the way they originally perceived it. And then we'll talk about NFP, but our focus in NFP, now, you know, you have a lot of material in here on NFP, just in case you don't know much about it. And I wanted to highlight something before we go any further on that, is on page 101, the second full paragraph. It says, the information on the following pages is resource material to assist you in your discussion on NFP. An overview is suggested. You've been provided with more detail than you would share with the couples so that you clearly understand the method when speaking to the engaged couples, etc. So these are the 4 key points. So you put a big star there. You're not expected to cover all this material. NFP is a very scientific approach. What we do is we try to give a very brief overview. They've heard some of it on the CD. We try to give a brief overview. We try to give a personal testimony, and we give them the name of the NFP coordinator. So you really ought to call this person, because to practice NFP effectively, you need a few months of charting your body and so forth. And so, you know, now's the time to get started with that.
And we try to say to them, now this is all part of your discernment. To make a good, responsible, moral decision, you need to take the classes to understand the method so you can see how it works, and you can, you know, work with your own understanding of the teaching now that you've immersed yourself in the teaching, and you can pray and prayerfully determine your compliance with this. You know, again, we can't make them choose.
No. All we usually hear is how wrong contraception is, but very rarely you're going to have a priest stand up there and talk about the theology behind natural family planning. I don't know that I've ever heard a priest describe it. You know, I mean, all they say is contraception is wrong. That's exactly what you hear.
Right. Exactly.
And so, I mean, that's why I'm sitting there having a problem wrapping my head around. Oh, this is like,
hopefully you heard something new to say.
Yeah, I can encourage this.
But I mean, even our priest that talked to us when we got married, we were both, you know, very Catholic and very open to natural family planning. And we asked him, you know, what about contraception? He said, as long as you don't shirk off your responsibility to have children, then it's okay.
Oh, no. Oh.
And agree, and I was like,
Wince.
well, that's not what
No.
I was taught.
No, that's not right.
But so, you have these different viewpoints out there.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And there've been a lot of misconceptions and a lot of people who didn't want to uphold that teaching of the church. And we have been really part of an upswing since JP2, I think, trying to really have people understand the real teaching that's out there.
Yeah.
Is it easy to live? No, but you know what? Nothing that's worth doing is easy.
Well, I have
No.
patients that ask me about natural family planning, honestly, and because you can't really tell them, and it's not like a 15-minute description.
Right.
I do think it's helpful though, Wally, and this was something that I was doing when we were not even dating yet, but I had always charted just as a woman who was not on any kind of medication. And so for me, I already knew that I had some infertile issues without ever even being married. And so I think that if my physician, I learned that from separately, but if my physician had said, well, here's a chart, here's a website to go to look at, and as a woman, this is going to be helpful for you. So as a couple, I think that would be an approach we would have, so not to get so into, okay, here's contraception and natural family planning. If you're, if you're going to abstain for 8 months, then we're assuming you don't have to use this. But in preparation, especially if you ever want to conceive, it's not just on day 15 have sex. There's a whole lot to it.
Yeah.
So if you want to go ahead and start laying the groundwork, here's a chart. It looks very overwhelming. Don't freak out. Here's how you do it. And for me, I just thought, oh my gosh, nuns do the charts. I loved it. We don't do it as much anymore, but, doing that was really helpful without even being sexually active. It was great.
Well, we really encourage them to take the classes to learn, and that's been one of my arguments for 40 years, 30 years.
Because I think that's what
It teaches it teaches you about your body, the woman, your own particular body, because every woman's cycle is different, and it gives your husband an appreciation for his particular wife's body and fertility. And it makes NFP, the practice of NFP, makes the fertility of a couple a shared responsibility. It's not, you better make sure you take your pill, or put on your condom, or whatever. We have a shared responsibility for this tremendous gift of fertility. And God is calling us in every act of intercourse to be open to life. Now, He's not calling us to have a child every time we make love. But if right now we've determined that we don't want to be open to life for grave reasons, then we're going to abstain during the fertile times so that we minimize the times that we could conceive a child. Yeah.
I would imagine that then it's pretty common that you'll have a couple who this will cause some conflict. One party comes to the marriage with the idea that they were going to do X, and another person comes to it with the idea, or during this preparation that they'd be open to NFP instead.
Right.
I suppose you spend a fair amount of time walking them through the conflict that they've now that you've now helped them create. They didn't realize they had, or never spoken about, or never.
It has
But see, that's where the prayer
Right.
discernment. That's why they got to do the process.
Right.
But I
So-
think that would be actually a point where you would say, we need to get you with someone
Exactly.
of higher training
what I was
to
saying.
discuss that. That's
Because we're
not
not
our
trying to
job.
teach it. We're not trying to teach. We understand it because we've used it and we can
But we're
explain
not
a little
trained to
bit, but we're
teach
not
it.
going to teach it. It's very scientific and it's even further advanced today than it was, when we used it.
Jeannie?
I know y'all need to move on, but we had a couple who, and in the cathedral parish, it's mandatory to take NFP. They took NFP. He was opposed. She was for it. He convinced her to contracept. This is all during their prior meeting with them. And so she chose, her form of contraception was an IUD. And so I said to her, do you realize that is an abortifacient? She's a nurse. And she looked at me cockeyed, and I said, and he didn't have a clue. I said, do you realize what you're asking her to do? I said, potentially abort your unborn baby. No idea. Awareness, education is so important. They were led to the trough to drink. They rejected NFP. They went this route, and you could just see the look of horror.
Yeah. They didn't realize
So,
it.
but we didn't judge. We just said these are the facts. This is what if you're choosing this is the potential of what can happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's our
And
responsibility.
it's their decision.
Yeah.
It is. It's our.
Yeah, and so when there is a conflict, Steve, like you mentioned, I think the challenge is to push them to the decision process. So if you guys are on the same page, this is the time, prayer, discernment, and make sure you're in mutual agreement. And in the meanwhile, we really would encourage you to begin to take the classes, at least to further educate yourself. We have, what we often hear is that you'll have someone, particularly usually the woman, says, well, I'm interested in NFP, but I haven't gotten around to taking the classes. And and I'll say, you're 2 months away from your wedding. I said, if you really want to wait a year or so before you have a child, you really need to get into this and start the charting, So you don't realize the long lead time. It's not like, taking NFP is like getting a shot or something, No, it's, it's a natural method. And we tell the story, we've used it not only, and our daughter, our oldest daughter, used it very effectively. She actually used it to plan when they would have their first child. And then she also, because she knew her body so well, she was able to identify some problems that she was having, some female problems. And she went to her doctor, and sure enough, she had a dermoid cyst that had to be removed, an ovary had to be removed. And the doctor said, I don't have any patients who know their bodies the way you know your body.
It could have been so much.
Yeah, it could have been more serious. So
If you look on page 117 handout, if we go back to the handouts that we're going on, we give them 117 handout number 1 is steps for making a moral decision. Number 2 is excerpts from Humani Vitae. Number 3 is the benefits of NFP. And then the facts surrounding contraception. So we give them all of those handouts. Now let me show you what we give them for homework at the end of this session. Prior to every session before this one, we've given them homeworks that deal with the subject we just had. Next one is the last night we're going to meet with them, and it's on sacrament. So we're not giving them, other than these handouts, we're not giving them anything on NFP or other than the CD that they listen to. What we're going to give them as homeworks is in preparation for the sacrament talk. Okay? So if you look in the back of the sacrament talk, we want to look at pages 134A. This is in the back of the sacrament section, 134A. It's called the faith dimension. Does everybody see that one? 134A. Tell me, am I speaking Greek or do y'all get it? Okay, you got it. Okay. 134A. The faith dimension. This is one we always use. What we're trying to do is give them homeworks that they can talk about their experience of the faith, their practice of the faith, their experience with God and prayer, and we're trying to set up the sacraments. So all of their homeworks, other than reading these handouts on NFP and making more decisions, is going to be on faith. So we give them the faith dimension. Number 134B, the covenant of marriage, we always give. Number 134C, the sacrament of matrimony. We always give those 3. Again, these are homeworks that you all need to be doing as well in preparation. Number 134D is interfaith marriage. If you have a couple who one is Catholic and the other is a non-Catholic couple, we give that one as well. Okay? Now, the other thing that you're going to do, the homeworks for this are kind of a little bit more complicated, but it's all in the manual, but I'm trying to walk you through it. Go back to page 117, special handout. That's at the very end, right before your Sacrament of Matrimony tab. Right before the Sacrament of Matrimony tab. Okay, it says making the wedding vows more real. You see that? Page 117, special handout. Okay, so what this is going to do, you're going to, on your computer, you're going to type in what's not in the box, but down here, the wedding vows. In the presence of God, Father Braun, our families, our friends, and this faith community, I, Wally, take you, Jennifer, to be my lawful wife, to have and to hold from this day forward. Write a love letter to your future spouse telling her what saying these vows means to you. You're going to type up this on some nice stationery, a nice piece of paper. You're going to type up those vows with your groom's name in it. Then you're going to change it and type it up with the bride's name in it, saying, to be my lawful husband instead, okay, you got that. All right, so you change it all so that now you have a nice piece of paper with the vows, with the groom's name in it, taking the white, the woman, and then the bride's name, taking the groom. And you're gonna fold it up and put it in 2 separate envelopes. At the end of the 5th meeting, when you're giving out all the homeworks, the last thing you're gonna do is give them their appropriate envelopes. And you're gonna say to them, we're gonna ask you to take these envelopes home. Do not open them until you're all by yourself, not with each other, all by yourself. Read what's in the envelope, do what it says, fold it back up, and do not discuss it with each other until you come back here. Bring it back with you. You will not have to share this with each other in front of us. This is totally private between the 2 of you, but we ask you not to discuss it till you come back. It's a great thing because they go home by themselves, they open that up, it's the first time they're seeing their own names in those vows. It's like a wake-up call that this is real, and then they sit and try to write that letter, and then at the end of the 6th meeting, right before we have the closing prayer service, we leave them in the room by themselves and they read their letters to each other. It's a great moment, it's a wonderful moment, and then we have a closing prayer service at the end of the 6th night. So.
Yeah, and the way to do that, all of those instructions are on the bottom of page 113. Bottom of 113, it explains to you about the handouts and how to set up. Number 4 there in the bottom of 113 talks about setting up that page, etc. So you know how to do that. One of the other things on page 113, and I'm not sure if they're using it here in this diocese or not, or
Jeannie might be able to take it.
Number 2, distribute a resource like the shared prayer booklet, and maybe ask the couple to set aside 2 times to experience praying together. Gina, do y'all use something like that, shared prayer booklet, this little doohickey?
We order our own, but they don't recommend anything in particular.
Okay. Depends on the couple. If the couple shows, a little bit of openness to wanting to grow in their faith and that they are practicing the faith, we try to challenge and encourage the couple to begin to learn how to pray together. Surprisingly, many couples will say, well, we go to church together, and we say maybe grace, but pray together? I don't know. That's so private, And this is really a great gift to marriage. There's a little section in the very last part of your manual with some aids on how you as a couple can pray together. So this is a little booklet that we don't give to all of our couples, but maybe at least half of them or so. It's from Ligori Press and available, and it's mentioned here in the book, and your parish can buy them for you, or if you have another little resource. But just the idea to get a couple to pray together. We like this because it's really, really basic. It has like 7 sort of episodes, like prayer on our anniversary, or prayer after an argument, evening prayer, morning prayer, prayer on our first date or whatever. We say pick 1 or 2, and just set the stage. Maybe light a candle, sit together, and pray. And so it gives you a little bit of a script for like the guy to start off, the girl to add, something else, and then it's open-ended. So see if you want to keep it going, after you do that. It's just sort of like a prayer starter, like you have a little charcoal starter for your grill or whatever. It's a little prayer starter. And we've actually had a couple of couples said that this was one of the most profound religious experiences they ever had, as simple as this is. So we don't do it for every couple, but we look for an opportunity to try to get them to deepen that sense of praying together.
All right, so let's take a 5-minute break and we'll have the last session, okay?
Yeah, we'll take it.